Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA, employees with disabilities can be excluded from the workplace if they are a direct threat. A direct threat is a person with a disability who poses a significant risk of substantial harm to themselves or others in the workplace. This video will provide you with information about direct threat under the ADA.
When deciding if an employee with a disability poses a direct threat, employers must rely on objective and current medical information. Decisions based on assumptions and stereotypes are not allowed. For example, in the 1990s, many employers excluded people with HIV, calling them a direct threat. This violated the ADA because it was based on assumptions instead of medical evidence, as HIV could not be transmitted through casual contact. So people with HIV were not a direct threat.
Employers must also conduct an individualized assessment. Remember that not all people with the same diagnosis act the same.
For instance, there may be a news story about a person with schizophrenia who committed an act of violence. However, that does not mean that an employee with schizophrenia will be violent. If an employer has a reasonable concern that an employee will be a danger in the workplace, the employer must make the direct threat decision based on an individualized assessment of the specific employee and not based on the person's diagnosis.
The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, also known as the EEOC, has created a 4-factor test employers should use when making this assessment.
Finally, when making direct threat decisions, reasonable accommodations must be considered. Sometimes the potential threat people with disabilities pose to themselves or others can be reduced if the employee is given a reasonable accommodation. For example, an employee with multiple sclerosis may have an unsteady gait and be a threat to her own safety if she typically spends a significant amount of time standing and walking. However, if she was permitted to work with a stool as a reasonable accommodation, her risk would be reduced.
So when deciding whether an employee is a danger to themselves or others, make sure you make an individualized assessment based on current, objective medical information. And don't forget to explore possible reasonable accommodations.